What do Falcons do? We rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, show we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, lifelong sports fan and the Golden Hard Dot, coming back to you today talking about quarterbacks for the Falcons. It's the obvious position that we need. I've already done a way too early video on quarterbacks that I like, particularly coming out of this year's draft. I do think looking at how the final draft order has dropped, that we might have to trade up to get even one of those four guys. It just depends. You're going to have guys like Chicago who may or may not be moving on from Fields. You got Washington who's looking at a quarterback. You've got New England looking at a quarterback. Who knows what the heck Arizona's going to do. The New York Giants need a guy. Tennessee probably is going to stick with Levis. I think he showed in it towards the end of the season. But basically the only ones that for sure are not going to be looking at quarterback are the Chargers and the Tennessee Titans, and every single other team, depending on what happens with Chicago, could be looking at quarterbacks. So I don't want the fifth best option in this draft class at number 8 overall. I'd much rather have, your Dallas Turners of the world, your Luas of the world, your Marvin Harrison Juniors, if we're going to go offense of the world. I'd rather have those guys than the fifth best quarterback in this class, because I still think that's a half measure compared to what we've had. Speaking of, we're going to talk about the free agent projections that we could potentially go for and the guys that I like from that. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I've got about, 7-ish guys to briefly mention here, whether I do or don't want them, guys that I think will be higher on the list, and then a couple of honorable mentions here and there sprinkled throughout. But let's jump right into it. First off, we're ignoring the draft completely here. We're just going to talk about guys that are going to be free agents. Let's start off with the hot free agent, Kirk Cousins. Yes, he is 34, 35, I think 35 years old. I think he's going to be 36 at the start of the next NFL season. He's a little bit older. Most quarterbacks do not live in the NFL into their late 30s and early 40s. It's been something that we've seen a little bit more frequently lately. You've had your Joe Flacco's returning. You've had Aaron Rodgers, who again got hurt this year. You've had Tom Brady playing into his mid-40s. You've had Peyton Manning going into his 40s. So you've had some of these guys who are prolific Hall of Fame quarterbacks, a lot of them anyway, who are playing the game at a high level for a long period of time, but not all of them are making it that long. Most guys aren't making it past like 35, 36. And Kirk Cousins has a decision to make. He got hurt earlier this year, but every indication is that he would like to continue playing for Minnesota. He's got a great connection with Justin Jefferson. Looks like he was developing one with Jordan Addison. TJ Hawkinson is his boy up there. And I don't think he wants to move on if he doesn't have to. And I do think he is a Super Bowl caliber quarterback with that team. He was starting to turn them around. The offense was looking great before he went down. The defense is just what wasn't actually working out for him. So he was not the problem this past year, and he actually won in prime time. So Kirk Cousins would be my absolute favorite guy that's going to be a free agent, but I don't have much hope of getting him. I do think he ultimately re-signs with Minnesota, unless they just decide to completely blow it up and do something in the draft or move on. Then, the next guy that I'd like to talk about, Baker Mayfield, has had a resurgence. He's only got like a $3.5 million deal with some incentives this year. I think he ended up making $4 million playing for the Bucs. All signs are that he is probably going to sign a good extension with the Buccaneers. Got a good connection with Mike Evans, okay connection with Godwin. But he is looking like a resurgent quarterback. He's a guy that I said a couple of years ago when I first started this channel, we were quarterback needy. He's a guy that I thought would have been worthwhile to try and maybe trade a day 2 or day 3 pick for when he was still at Cleveland and potentially try to sign on. I thought he had something left in the tank. That was before he went to Carolina. Obviously, he looked terrible in Carolina. I wasn't really thrilled about him at that point, but now we know how much of a garbage organization Carolina actually is. I don't know that that was all of his fault. So I do like Baker. I think he would be good for the Falcons. I think he would make our weapons look good. I think he would find Kyle Pitts. And again, it's going to really depend on what the coach coming in wants, because that's what we ultimately need to figure out. And God, I hope it's not Bill Belichick. I really hope it is not him. I don't want a rental at quarterback, and I don't want a rental at the head coach position. Bill Belichick is going to be there long enough to beat the all-time wins record, and then he's out. I don't think he's going to coach into his late 70s and 80s. I think he's going to do enough to get his 16 or 17, whatever number of wins it is, and then after that season, he's out. So I don't want to be doing the coaching search again 3 years from now, so I don't want Belichick. But again, it's really going to depend on whoever we bring in, what they want to do at quarterback. But Baker would be a solid option. Jameis Winston is another guy that I still think has something left in the tank. But honestly, I was more okay with the idea of Jameis until the Week 18 New Orleans game, where he led the go-ahead 1-yard line fake victory formation touchdown for Jamal Williams. No, at this point, screw you, Jameis Winston. I hope you rot in free agency. Hope nobody pick you up. I hope that all coaches see that as a huge sign of disrespect to both them, the organization you play for, and your opponents. And I hope you get relegated to the UFL, USFL, XFL, whatever it is. So absolutely not for Jameis Winston. I think he's a talented quarterback, but I think he just showed a major lack of awareness and a major lack of discipline. So no, screw you, Jameis. Get the heck out of here. Go get somebody else's crab legs. Then you have Gardner Minshew, who I think is a solid quarterback. He is a mid-tier quarterback on almost any team. He's not an elite guy. And he has certainly done a lot to help the Indianapolis Colts make a run to potentially get in the playoffs, a team that should have been like 4-13 after Anthony Richardson goes down. And he's a guy who should not be a backup in this league. He should be a starter. But again, my problem with him is he just a half measure? We've been doing half measures for the last 3 years at quarterback. We had an aging Matt Ryan who was unhappy after we pursued Deshaun Watson. Never should have done that. We had the Marcus Mariota experiment, which he's a free agent too. Don't want to even think about that option. And then you had the Desmond Ridder experiment. And all of those have been half measures or garbage. Taylor Heineke, you could throw him into that mix. They have all been garbage. And I do think that Gardner Minshew at this point in his career has more juice and more fire than any of those options. Now, yes, he didn't play well in Atlanta. That's the only game that the Falcons actually showed up for in entirety this entire freaking season. But hey, Gardner Minshew, solid quarterback. I do think he can make Atlanta better, but I don't think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback even in Atlanta. I think he's still like that middle tier guy, but certainly a man who deserves to be a starter in this league, and he's going to be a little bit cheaper of an option. He's not going to be your $30-40 million a year guy. He's going to be like that 15 to 20, somewhere in there $1 million per year guy. And heck, you might even sign him as a backup somewhere, which is what his role has basically been, which then you can get him for probably under $5 or $6 million if he's going to be the backup somewhere. But I do really like Gardner, and I said that in previous videos when we were looking at free agent quarterbacks last year, but it just didn't work out, and I do think he was a better option than anything we had this year, would be a better option than anything we've had the last 3 years. But again, a half measure at quarterback in my mind. The final guy that's going to be a free agent that might be interesting, but again, kind of like I really don't want this, Ryan Tannehill. He really doesn't have a lot left in the tank. There's nothing to be excited about him for. Is he a better quarterback than what we've had? Probably. Is he a half measure? Absolutely. Is he worse than Gardner Minshew at this point in his career? Probably. So, again, a guy that's out there as a free agent, not anybody that I'm excited about, but I mean, he is a man that exists and would be worth talking about a little bit. Drew Lock is kind of an honorable mention in there, and then you've got a couple of other guys in there. Joe Flacco, at this point in his career, yeah, he had a great resurgent run with Cleveland up until their playoff game, but not a guy that I'm overly excited about. Carson Wentz is another honorable mention in there, a guy who, again, has had some fire in him before, but after he got hurt has never been the same. So you've got some guys in there that I think are worthwhile. Jacoby Brissett is another one in there that's kind of an honorable mention. But let's talk about the ones that are either anticipated trade targets or anticipated to be cut and become a free agent as we approach March when you get to some cap issues here. Let's start with Justin Fields. Justin Fields is arguably the most intriguing guy in free agency right now. And it's because he is completely locked in to the Chicago Bears. They have not extended him. They have tried to use the last half of the season to evaluate him. I do not know why they believe in Matt Eberflus. I would have gotten rid of him well before I would have thought about getting rid of Justin Fields. But it looks like they're going to keep Eberflus because of how well he played towards the end of the season, or how well he had that team playing towards the end of the season. And I don't get it, but they're going to keep him. I think this is a good year to be looking for a coaching prospect. They just don't want to do it. I don't understand it, but they just don't. But Justin Fields, he can run the ball, and that's something that I think is important. especially if you're going to go into Atlanta where we already have two good running backs, a third aging guy who may or may not be on the team next year. You have some weapons in Drake London and Kyle Pitts. If we are not having to trade up or draft a quarterback, you can look at one of these top wide receivers in this year's draft, or potentially looking for the next left tackle prospect to replace Jake Matthews one day. There's a lot of things you can do to try and protect your quarterback and go on. And Justin Fields would be somebody who I think could find an instant connection with Drake London and probably find an instant connection with Kyle Pitts, as much as he likes to throw to DJ Moore. And then, the name of their running, Cole Kmet. As much as he likes to throw to Cole Kmet, it is impossible for me to think he would not find success here with those two guys. Now, that said, because Chicago has the number 1 pick in this draft, that actually hurts them for Justin Fields' value. Because everybody knows if they're trying to offload Justin Fields, they're going to be taking quarterback. Caleb Williams is about to be a Bear. Or Drake May, if Caleb Williams is unwilling to sign with them. Whatever ends up happening. It looks like there may be some drama in this draft. But if they don't trade out of the number 1 pick, which means they're not going to go quarterback, then they're looking at a day 2 late pick. Nobody's going to overpay for Justin Fields because they're either going to have to cut him or they're going to have to just sit him on the bench for a heck ton of money. And nobody wants to do that. So if he's going to get traded, it's not going to be for what he probably actually is worth. And it's all because of where the Bears are in that draft. But I do like Justin Fields. I think he would be intriguing. I don't know that he would be phenomenal in Atlanta, but I think he has a better shot. He's from the area. He's somebody who went to Georgia. I never thought he should have gone to Georgia because we had Jake Fromm, who had just taken us to the national title at the time. Did not make sense why he wanted to come to us. He ended up going to Ohio State and had a pretty good career there, but he's a Georgia kid, and I think it'd be great to have him come home. The other guy that is probably going to get cut in March by all indications is Russell Wilson. Now, I don't have Russell Wilson's age immediately here, but we're going to look it up. 35 years old. I thought he was up there. So, he's been in the league a long time. He did not have a bad year. This was the reason the Denver Broncos failed was not completely on Russ this year. I think it was coaching. I think he didn't jive well with Sean Payton. And it really depends on if the next coach is going to want to take a shot on him and if we can afford him. I don't think he needs the contract that he was on in Denver. They're going to have to eat a ton of cap space or a ton of dead cap if they cut him, very similar to what we did with Matt Ryan a few years back. But either way, I do think that the Denver Broncos are looking to move on at quarterback based on how they played the end of the season. And it may be for the best for Russell Wilson, but he probably has a few good years of football. But again, a guy who is probably will be a quality starter for a couple more years and then fall off of a cliff, but a half measure for the long term for any team that gets him. He is not going to be your 10-year starter. He's not going to be your franchise QB for the next 5 to 10 years. He's got somewhere between 3 to 5 years left in the tank based on how he's played, based on what I've seen from him. And then after that, you're going to be looking all over again. So it just depends. The Falcons have been in a perpetual rebuild for the last 6 years. I'm tired of rebuilding. I don't want half measures, but I think all of these guys are intriguing. So if you had to put a gun to my head here and say, who do I like best out of this? Justin Fields makes the most sense, but I'm not overpaying for him. I am not going to get rid of draft capital and potential stars for this team going forward for the next 4 to 5 years or longer. I'm not going to forego that to take Justin Fields on a hope and a prayer that he figures it out in Atlanta when he has not figured it out in completion in Chicago in the last 3 years. So I do like him best out of the options. I think Russell Wilson, honestly, if he becomes available, is the pseudo second best option. Kirk Cousins would be up there as well, but I just don't think he's really available. Baker Mayfield is also up there, and Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is probably the most realistic option in free agency if we decide to do something a little cheaper and, again, try to get somebody like Marvin Harrison Jr. or go for your Dallas Turner, your edge rusher, something like that. I think he would be a solid option there. And I think you could get him for relatively cheap. I think, again, you're going to be paying a lot less than $20 to $25 million a year maximum for him. And I think he could be a good 2 to 3 year guy with the potential to turn into a 5 to 10 year guy. it really depends on the coach, and we're not going to have an answer to this until we have an answer to coach. And please, for the love of God, Arthur Blank, you're never going to see this video. Please, not Belichick. Just not Belichick. I know he's a winning coach. I know there's a lot of Falcons fans who would disagree with that, saying that, hey, he knows how to win, but he hasn't known how to win for the last 4 years since Tom Brady left. Not really. He's ruined Mac Jones. I just don't have faith in him, and I really would rather him go to a Dallas or go somewhere where he can get his wins and get out of the NFL. I don't want him to be here as a part of our rebuilding process. I don't think he's anybody that I would like to see as a part of our organization. I'm sure he has a good relationship with Arthur Blank. You know, those guys are both up there in age, and they've been around the league a long time, so I'm sure they have like some good old boy relationships with each other. I just don't want it. Other than that, I'm okay with most coordinators. I think Raheem Morris is an okay guy. I wish we'd kept him in house from when he was our defensive coordinator back right before we got rid of Dan Quinn, which would give him another shot. He really didn't get a fair shake at that time. There's a few other guys that are out there right now. Obviously, Eric Bieniemy, we'll see how he does on his interview. You've got a few other guys in the mix here. I absolutely love the idea of Jim Harbaugh to the Falcons. He would be my absolute favorite pick, but it looks like there may be a couple of options for him, and one of them, he's a California guy. He loves LA, and I think he probably is ultimately going to end up with the Chargers from everything that we're kind of hearing from the boots on the ground in the NFL. I don't love that. I would much rather have him in Atlanta, picking his quarterback for the future and going from there. But that's just my thoughts, and this is mostly a quarterback talk. So thank you for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you to the 200 plus of you who have subscribed at this point. You guys mean the world to me. And as always, rise up.